what a few years we've had. God, what a few years. You know, we've had Brexit. Of course, nobody mentions Brexit. Yeah. We've had COVID. We've had 12 years of wounded leaders at the helm. Unbelievable. And have you noticed how they now say, well, you know, there's going to be some tough decisions. The government's really handling this as if Brexit hasn't happened, as if it isn't the wounded leader problem getting replicated. So I'm not going to, in these turbulent times, I've had a divorce. So everything's all up for change. So I'm not going to read a paper to you. I'm just going to tell a few stories. And I'm probably going to upset quite a lot of you with some of what I've got to say, so be kind to me. So this talk is about Britain in the age of disconnect. What do I mean by disconnect? Well, there's a lot of disconnect in the world, and there's two nations that are leading the field, really. One is America, and the other is Britain. And the kind of disconnect are rather different, because one of the things you do in psychotherapy, you learn about the difference between... What about this mic? It's booming, isn't it? What should I do?
Just move it an inch further away from your face.
Move it away?
Yeah, just an inch.
Yeah. We learn about the different kinds of ways of disconnecting. So one is denial, and America is firmly based in denial. The denial of the whole foundation of the country with genocide and every promise to the Native Americans broken. Denial about gun laws, as if it's got nothing to do with all the children getting killed in the schools. Denial about climate change. Denial about election results. Denial about fake news. Yeah? Robert Bly died a year ago, one of my teachers and mentors. And he wrote in 1990 the following: it's possible that the US has achieved the first consistent culture of denial in the modern world. Denial can be considered an extension into all levels of society of the naive person's inability to face the harsh facts of life. Naive person. The health of any nation's soul depends on the capacity of adults to face the harsh facts of the time. Denial begins with the refusal to admit that we will die. Therefore, you have a culture which bases itself in a belief in God, which helps a lot with the difficulty of death. Now, Britain's not a culture of denial. There are some things that are denied, but denial is not our way. For example, Brexit. We don't deny Brexit. We just don't mention it. Because Britain is a culture of dissociation. And the thing about boarding school is that's where we train our elites in dissociation. Yeah? So the first thing I want to tell you, which is probably going to upset some of you, is that I'm not actually interested in boarding schools. I'm really not. What I'm interested in is how do they train us to dissociate and disconnect, and how do we reverse that training? And why do they do it? And what are the historical underpinnings of this? Because as a nation, we are dissociating all the time. And you remember the recent thing about the truss economics that we were supposed to get trickle-down wealth, which of course has been disproved by academics for the last 40 years. Yeah? Wealth doesn't trickle down, but attitudes do. So we're busy dissociating as a nation and compartmentalizing. Somebody spoke to me at lunch just now and said how she had an experience of all things coming together at a certain moment. And he said, well, this is like a defragmentation in the brain, because if you train your brain to departmentalize, to compartmentalize, to fragment, it will do it. And the genius of the system is it trains you whilst it's breaking your loyalty to your original heritage, your family, your culture, your emotional language. So we are experts at that. So we don't need denial. Yeah? And the other thing that goes along with dissociation, as those of you who've worked therapeutically in things will realize, is projection and projective identification. So if you dissociate, if you've been trained to dissociate in a culture that normalizes dissociation, that normalizes breaking the attachments from the elite children, that then has intergenerational issues of attachment. Here's where Simon's triple lock comes in. Yeah. I'd say a word about the triple lock and the double bind. See, the double bind and the triple lock are not the same things. A double bind is putting in a situation where you're damned if you do or damned if you don't, like being sent to boarding school, for example. What Simon is saying, look, we're raised in this culture which has upper class features to it, and therefore you normalize the problems of children being sent away. It's true, but there's a wider and a deeper thing going in, is that when you're versed in cultures of disconnect, you have to get right outside those cultures to be able to see them. And if you can't, you're like the fish in the water, and the fish don't discuss water, we assume. I mean, don't know. So this culture of disconnect is basically something that happened after the Enlightenment, when rationality became really the thing. And the rational man, as I've written about in my books, is the model. And the rational man did not include women, it did not include ethnic minorities, as we talk about now, it did not include people of color, it did not include children. Big problem, because some of the children were boy children and could potentially become rational men, so you had to do a very strong training in dissociation, so they forgot about their mother and their home and their feelings. And lo and behold, once they'd forgotten about their feelings, they started to make poor judgments. As Will Hutton says, Tory party has a history of poor judgments going right back to the Corn Laws. This is because they're dissociated from their feelings. And you can't make good judgments without a moral compass. But what you can do is you can exploit the earth, and you can not have a conscience about it, and you can exploit indigenous people. So modernism, which is the movement which comes out of that, I'm not talking about art, I'm talking about consciousness, runs on dissociation. And Britain is at the forefront of this. You know, we started with the Industrial Revolution. I mean, I just had a little holiday up in Derbyshire, and I was appalled to realize that in that fabulous countryside, these limestone dales, underneath, men were working 450 feet down, pulling lead out of the ground. You know, extraordinary. And that along with, you know, our slave trade is how we got our wealth. And it's like, we're not going to ever apologize in Britain for any of that. So this culture of dissociation, if you continue saying yes to the culture of dissociation, it's very hard not to, because you need to step out. You're part of it still. And it's a bit like we say to the boarding school survivors, as soon as you go for survival mode, what you're doing is you're sending your little boy back to school, or your little girl back to school. You're doing it. So how do we think our way through this? Well, along with dissociation, you have projection. And what are we projecting to? Let me take a step back. During the COVID, the lockdown on that period, I thought what was coming to me is, how did I get involved in this? How did I get involved in this naming boarding school problem? And while I was thinking about that, I had a letter, believe it or not, from someone who had been to the same prep school at me. Now, I went to an English prep school at the age of 12 in order to take common entrance. I'd been in an American school, and the American school, although I of course was separated from my parents who lived in Germany, was quite cool. And we were all trying to be little teenagers, and we discovered rock and roll. This is the end of the 50s, yeah. And then suddenly I had to go to this English prep school, and I went from, we had Levi's, you know, in those days. You couldn't buy them in Britain. And we had turned-up collars and loafers, and we were cool little chappies. And I had to go back to this prep school in Broadstairs and wear shorts and a blazer, and it was quite a thing. Anyway, so this guy, he wrote to me and he said, I've written a story about our time at boarding school. And he sent me a chunk of it. And I hadn't heard of this guy for 60 years. Yeah? And in this story, I'll read you a little chunk so you could get it. Anyway, I appear in this story as a kind of Batman to this guy's Robin. And what he wants to do is he wants to take down this master who is savagely beating people. Yeah? So he writes, this is a little section. I engaged my best friend Nick Duffell's services in this enterprise. A splendid fellow who'd lived abroad till his family came back to England. Nick was always telling me he had the misfortune to be sent to Stonehouse, there you are, which he considered to be the worst academic institution on planet Earth. Everything was wrong with Stonehouse. He had to play the crappy game cricket, and Nick thought the school tradition of all the boys being called by their surnames or nicknames was positively Dickensian. This is 1962, said Nick, not 1862. Nick, however, was a tall, strong lad and a high-energy being, and an ideal partner if I was up for a fight and I was after Peter Ingram's guts. Nick and I broke the school tradition and called each other Nick and Chris. When I advised Nick of my intentions to investigate the goings-on in the upper sixth, particularly Peter Ingram's, Nick asked, are we going to play detectives, Chris? I mean, we were 12, right? Yes, Nick, I replied. That's exactly what we're going to do. And the story goes on. So, what I started to see, already I was outside the system a little bit, you see? I only had one toe in. I was rooted in an American culture, and in those days, the American schools are very open. And I wasn't being told all the time that I was a stupid child, a stupid boy. And then, of course, when I got into my public school, there was all the time another double bind. I'm a stupid boy, but I'm going to be a leader, right? The world is relying on you to, bring upper class values, but you're a stupid child. And I could not figure this out. So I asked a lot of very stupid questions all the time. And so I never kind of got it. But the problem is I now remember another incident. By the time I'd just taken my common entrance, I remember sitting at the table with my mother and the cleaner and saying, oh God, if I go to grammar school, I'm a total failure. And I cringe at that because by that stage, the class thing had put its claws in. So how to stay out. So the first thing is how to stay out. With dissociation, you get projection. Watch what you're projecting onto. That's the first thing. I hope you enjoyed those 10 days of morn porn we had recently, did you? Morn porn? Do you remember? The Queen died, And the BBC told us every day what we were feeling. Did you notice that? Every day. The BBC told us we are now all reunited and we're feeling terribly sad. I had people write me emails saying, "Oh, this tragic time." How old was she? 96? Come on. So we're projecting all the time. We're projecting. I come back from France after, I'm like back anew in Britain. And you know what I see when I'm driving around? No old cars. Not a one. Everybody's got a new car. On borrowing, right? On leasehold. Audis, BMWs, everywhere. We project onto our cars. What do we project? Perhaps we project, I'm powerful, onto my car. We're projecting that we had a loving mother onto the Queen. I was sitting in a train on the way to Crewe on the end of that thing, and I said, when there was a bunch of Northerners in the room sharing their enthusiasm, I said, "But I thought she never touched her children. I was invisible." Yeah? What else do we project onto? Celebrities. The celebrity cult in Britain is staggering. I opened the Metro on the way here, and there's like 6 pages in the middle about celebs, including Matt Hancock on desert, what kind of thing he's on. I mean, how do these people dare to show their face in public again? How does Gavin Williamson get another look? Because we all dissociate. Nothing's connected. And here's the thing. If the American culture is sort of based in this belief in God, the British culture is based in dog. And the projection into dogs has become more extreme. My God, I know you're going to lynch me after this. I can feel it. What do we project into dogs? My sweetness, my unseen inner child, my loving side. So I have a girlfriend whose partner, whose son is severely autistic, likes to walk in the forest. And he's very autistic, so there's a very, very high anxiety going there. And he doesn't like dogs. So wherever you walk in Britain, there's dogs everywhere. Beach, woods, everywhere. So the dog comes bounding up, as it does, and the owner goes, "Oh, he only wants to be friends. He's terribly sweet, he just wants to say hello." Oh, hang on a minute. There's a severely autistic child in here going into meltdown. "Oh, he's terribly sweet, he just wants to say hello." I mean, this projection onto dogs is very serious. And where did it get worse? It got worse in COVID, when we were all isolated. So if we want to stop the culture of dissociation, it's great that we're trying to stop children getting sent away from school. It's great that we're trying to stop the transgenerational thing. But the whole modernist project of dissociating has to be stopped. And we have to do our own little part in this. It's like we've got to regulate for the climate, we've got to also turn the light bulb off, yeah? So watch what we're dissociating onto. Watch where we put our sweetness, our power, our attractiveness. Because that's in our charge. You might need to get a foot out somehow, whatever that means. Take a sabbatical or something and go somewhere completely different where people aren't doing it. Because, we are doing it in such consistency. I mean, Bly says it's a consistent culture of denial. But I would say we've got a consistent culture of dissociation and projection. And then we start to get a handle on it, because you can't do it when you're right in it. So in a way, that's my answer why I seem to have got this job of calling out boarding school, English boarding school, because I was kind of mostly out of it and then came into it. Yeah? So, I mean, that's good inner work. And because you're projecting doesn't mean you're bad. It just means, can you sort of recoup some of your projections? Can you find different places to put your power or your sweetness? And it's worth doing. And that way, we get a sort of sense of recreating another kind of culture. Yeah. In the meantime, I went back to my American boarding school, which is in a town in Switzerland called St. Gallen. And I was doing a talk at the University of St. Gallen. We're doing a book about elite formation, just how do you train elites? And what are the models? And I snuck in for a visit to the school. It's at the top of a hill. And I hadn't been there since the 50s. And I got caught having a look around. And you know, my girlfriend says, well, you can't just go wandering around. I said, this is where we used to throw the ball around. No, caught me in. They caught us and they said, would you like a cup of tea? I was perfect, wasn't it? I mean, absolutely perfect. Not, what the hell are you doing here? Would you like a cup of tea? And it was the woman running the English department. And so she got us in, went and made the tea, and I think I had to write our names, I think she may have Googled me while she was making tea, because the tea was all over the sauces when she came back. And so I asked, well, what are the youngest children you have here? 5. 5. And what kind of school is it now? Because when I was there, it was for all army personnel displaced in southern Western Europe. So what they do now, and this is how on their toes they are, the boarding school culture. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, our assault on the boarding school culture is liable to be not terribly successful because they're quite smart. And so what they are doing now is this particular school has become a school for the super rich, and they're doing individually tailored education program for these children. And most of the children, they're coming from the Gulf, from Singapore, from all those super neoliberal places. And the boarding schools, as you probably know, they're opening up franchises in these places, and they're growing, and they're changing, and they're adapting. So, whilst we keep up our work, and whilst we keep supporting our recovery, I'm saying, let's all see how we can go against the grain of the dissociating modernist culture that Britain has led the world in, and try to do things differently. Thank you very much.